In this podcast episode, Andrew Wilson shares a candid and deep insight into his personal background, ideological convictions, and his approach to political and cultural debates. The conversation touches on his upbringing, family dynamics, Christian values, and his journey from a robotics mechanic to a prominent political analyst and debater. Wilson discusses his views on progressivism, the influence of Islam in the West, societal challenges, debates in the digital age, and reflects on national and global issues involving governance, culture wars, and ideological conflicts. Andrew Wilson opens up about his childhood, revealing a life marked by frequent moves and a lack of a stable foothold in one place. He was neither popular nor unpopular, but considered a normal guy, leaning more towards delinquency than academic excellence. As a teenager, he preferred cutting school and spending time outside traditional educational settings, intuitively sensing that school was a poor fit for him. Despite this, he was a gifted reader from an early age, excelling in comprehension and knowledge recall, though never particularly skilled in mathematics. Wilson credits his father as the pivotal male figure in his life. His father, an entertainer in California who later served in the Air Force, faced significant hardships, including a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis that doctors said would be fatal. Against all odds, he survived and became a cornerstone in Wilson's upbringing. His father's greatest teaching to Andrew was how to think critically by questioning assumptions and the sources behind beliefs, a method that shaped Andrew's approach to truth and discourse. The family was blended, consisting of children from multiple marriages of both parents, and Wilson was raised closely with his mother's two children, hardly noticing their half-sibling status. A common trait among the siblings was their refusal to accept nonsense, combined with a rigorous ability to think comprehensively and critically, free from presuppositional constraints. Wilson's entrance into the political and cultural commentary scene was accidental. Before COVID-19, he was focused on his work as a robotics mechanic. The lockdown period, however, led him into online debates, initially crashing panels on social media and YouTube, where he often faced progressive opponents. His style, fueled by a simmering rage against progressive ideology, quickly gained traction, and he transitioned into a prominent debater and political analyst with a significant audience, despite having no prior ambition or experience in entertainment or public discourse. He emphasizes that his success highlights a degradation in public discourse quality, where basic logic and reasoned argument have become rare commodities, allowing someone with a foundational grasp of logic to make substantial inroads in debates against more experienced but less coherent opponents. Wilson expresses profound animosity toward progressives, albeit recognizing that such hatred conflicts with Christian teachings. He sees progressives as responsible for authoritarian measures during the COVID-19 pandemic, including lockdowns and mandatory mask and vaccine policies, which he equates with the rise of a fascist state apparatus. To him, progressives weaponize accusations, like labeling opponents as fascists, while themselves enforcing policies that restrict freedoms. He frames the political landscape as a zero-sum power struggle in which Christian values must prevail to avoid being ruled by lunatics. Wilson criticizes the apologetics wing of Christianity for their non-engagement in the rough, contentious political arena, deriding them as sewing circle Christians, who prefer virtue signaling over fighting. He praises those like himself and Stephen Crowder who fight in the cultural trenches, despite often being maligned or attacked. Wilson intertwines the challenges posed by progressive ideology with what he perceives as the threat of Muslim immigration. He argues that Islamic communities in the U.S. and Europe strategically ally with progressive leftists to advance immigration policies that allow more Muslims into the West, despite Muslims locally opposing the social values of the left. He calls progressives useful idiots in this context, providing a pathway for demographic and cultural change that threatens Christian hegemony. He outlines what he understands as the Muslim takeover or invasion, centered on demographic growth through high birth rates and cultural non-assimilation, often accompanied by Islamic fundamentalism. Wilson emphasizes the long-term strategy of Muslims using their ultimate weapon, the woman's womb, to numerically dominate Western societies over generations. Wilson is an avid debater with a wide-ranging portfolio, covering topics such as feminism, communism, Islam, and Christian ethics. He is known for engaging with challenging opponents, including Ivy League graduates, and has faced opposition from multiple ideological camps. He recognizes the importance of selecting debates aligned with his strengths, particularly preferring to debate Muslims on ideological grounds, as these are areas where he feels most competent. A significant aspect of his debating strategy is challenging the epistemological foundations of opposing viewpoints, especially progressive or atheistic positions, which he argues lack a coherent basis to justify moral stances. In discussions surrounding taboo subjects such as incest, he intertwines logic and Christian values to challenge relativistic or nihilistic perspectives. Wilson often faces aggressive, personal attacks in debates, which he meets with equal vigor, seeing it as part of the contentious arena that many on the Christian right shy away from. He expresses disdain for critic groups that avoid direct confrontation, yet pass judgment on those who actively engage. The conversation reveals Wilson's personal struggles, including a period of 7 years during which he distanced himself from Christian values and engaged in promiscuity and self-centered behavior. It was ultimately his wife's steadfast faith in him and relationship that catalyzed his return to Christianity and conservative values. Wilson describes his marriage as transformative, despite its complex beginnings involving a partner with previous marriages and children, a situation he acknowledges is difficult and not typically recommended, but can succeed with effort and faith. His faith is foundational but nuanced, rooted in non-denominational Christianity, and shapes his worldview, ethical framework, and political approach. He stresses that Christian governance is both inevitable and necessary, arguing that attempting to separate faith from political leadership is both unrealistic and dangerous to cultural survival. Wilson views politics fundamentally as a contest for power. He firmly asserts that Christians should actively seek political authority rather than cede it, as failure to do so inevitably results in rule by ideologies antithetical to Christian values. He rejects libertarian ideas that Christians can govern solely on moral persuasion without holding power. For Wilson, political engagement, even if brutal and contentious, is crucial for defending cultural and religious principles. He critiques leftist governance in U.S. states like California and New York as driven by lunatics who pursue suicidal empathy and open border policies that threaten sovereignty and social cohesion. Wilson notes the irony that far-right figures gain momentum as a direct reaction to these policies and the failure of traditional conservatives. A critical aspect of Wilson's commentary concerns the role of online platforms and media in shaping political discourse. He discusses the deplatforming of figures like Nick Fuentes and Stefan Molyneux, which, rather than silencing these voices, led them to create independent platforms that now amass significant audiences. Wilson sees this as a strategic failure on the part of the left and mainstream platforms, attributing the rise of controversial right-wing figures to progressive attempts to censor and suppress dissent. He is optimistic about recent changes under new ownership, such as Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, X, which he believes will allow freer speech and new battlegrounds for debate. He also critiques the dynamics within right-leaning media circles, including conflicts and lack of support among conservative Christians, labeling the internal critics as more harmful than the external left-wing opposition. Wilson engages critically with modern feminism, distinguishing between overt feminist rhetoric and a culturally embedded covert feminism that shapes societal expectations. He argues feminist narratives often demand male privilege under the guise of equality, but fall short in fulfilling reciprocal roles or virtuous character. Engaging with female conservatives and feminists, Wilson challenges them on the consistency and implications of their views. For instance, the expectation of male protection and provision without exhibiting virtue or gratitude. He emphasizes traditional gender roles, but recognizes the complexity and nuance required in relationships, cautioning against premature advice without comprehensive understanding. Wilson shares the tragic story of losing a son in a car accident, a deeply painful and life-altering event. He recounts the immediate aftermath, the agony experienced by his family, and the counsel he received from a former police sniper who directed him toward taking care of those left behind. This personal anecdote adds a somber dimension to Wilson's persona and worldview, illustrating the depth of human suffering beneath his public persona of rage and skepticism. Throughout the podcast, Wilson mentions his interactions with various public figures, including Stephen Crowder, Candace Owens, Dave Smith, and others in conservative and manosphere circles. He is often critical of but maintains professional respect for many peers. He stresses the importance of showing up to debate and engage rather than simply critiquing from the sidelines, contrasting himself with figures he sees as less willing to enter the arena. He also discusses attempts to set up debates with notable opponents and the frequent refusals, highlighting challenges in the current media landscape. Toward the end, Wilson touches on topics related to intelligence agencies, government transparency, and matters like the Epstein case. He discusses the complexity of national security decisions, blackmail operations, and ethical dilemmas faced by leaders who balance public safety with moral standards. He expresses skepticism, but also a pragmatic understanding of geopolitical realities, emphasizing the difficulty of achieving purity in government action while navigating crises and the survival of the nation. Andrew Wilson runs his own political commentary show, The Crucible, and maintains a daily presence with the extravaganza on Rumble, accompanied by active engagement on social platforms like X. He has created spaces for open dialogue with his audience, offering opportunities for direct interaction and deeper discussions on strategy, debates, and political analysis. The podcast host praises Wilson's conversational skills and point guard abilities in managing discourse, noting his capacity to entertain, inform, and orchestrate complex conversations. Throughout the episode, Wilson repeatedly returns to the idea that American and Western culture are at a critical juncture of existential battle. He sees ideological clashes not just as political disagreements, but as spiritual and civilizational wars, where the stakes involve demographic survival, moral clarity, and the retention of foundational values. He advocates for uncompromising engagement in political and cultural arenas, warning against passivity, and emphasizing that strength, clear-eyed thinking, and willingness to fight are essential to shaping the future.